Hello and welcome to a game development video that I'm posting. Today I'm working on something in Unity, the main game that I've been working on and that I'm going to be working on for the foreseeable future until it is finished and I get to a different project, is this kind of game where you play the dog. I just want to go over something that I'm working on in the actual game, so I'm not going to go into what the game is about. I've spoken a little bit to that in a different video. So right now I'm just going to talk about some of the advancements I've made in the movement in the game, and specifically the animation that has been put into the jumping in the game, all the vertical movement. So if I just get into the Unity right here and I press play to test out the game, if you see when I don't have a turning animation for the dog yet, but if I jump, there is a full jumping animation. And what one might expect from this on first glance is that this might be one full animation. But this is actually about 5 or so animations all in one, connecting for sort of a seamless transition from on the ground to preparing to jump, rising in elevation, transitioning to a fall, falling, and then landing. So if I can just stop right here and jump over into Blender, I'll show you frame by frame what's going on. These are all the animations that I have for the dog so far. And if I go to jump start, if you look at this little marker on the bottom, here's where all the animations are: to jump start and to jump end. So to jump is what I'm saying is the initiating the jump. So these little markers show the beginning and end of the animation. If I zoom out here, the beginning of the animation transitions from kind of the general idle stance into a crouch down and then jump up. And that is all one animation. What one might expect is that the entire act of jumping, rising, landing, and all that would be one full animation, but in fact it's several animations linked together, and there's a very good reason for doing that. And if I go in here and I look at from this jumping animation, and then these 2 frames here, these 3 frames with nothing happening, that is the animation of it holding the jump. If I wanted to, I could go in there and make maybe the tail flutter a little bit in the wind, or the ears flutter a bit and have the body move a little bit so it looks a little more dynamic while it's being animated. But for testing purposes, it's just flat nothing. It's just a frame of animation, 3 frames of animation with no interpolation or anything like that. And if I transition to the next section of the animation, it says to fall start and to fall end. So to fall means we're transitioning into the falling animation, just like how we were transitioning into the jumping animation at the beginning. And this is transitioning from that rising action to that falling action. And we have it right there. I don't see the holding fall animation. I ended up exporting it and I got it for the final animation, but there should be another one just like this right here with the holding jump, which is a holding fall, and that's in the final product, but not the final product, but the final iteration of this movement. But we have a falling animation just like this holding one right here. And if I go to the landing, after that executes, it'll transition to the landing animation, and it'll just play through here like this. And these are just subsequent animations in Blender that are in here. But when it comes to something like Unity, these animations are being governed by variables and logic that are coming into play as the game is playing. So I'm going to play it once again, and we're going to look and see when I press space, it runs the animation of the jump, and it uses what's called animation event, where at a certain frame of the animation it'll execute a function. And when I'm jumping, at the very kind of arc of that lifting motion, it executes the jumping function, which adds the force upward. And there's logic in place that transitions it to that rising animation, that holding rise, and then to the transition to the falling animation, that falling, that holds, and then it lands. And if we look over here in the animator, you can see it's looping that idle animation. But as soon as I jump, if you look in the top right, there's a jump start animation right here. If I jump, it executes that. And you can see that hold up animation is playing for a long time. As long as I'm going up, it plays that and it loops. And then as soon as I start going down, it transitions to the 2 down animation. And then it holds on the hold down animation until it reaches a land and reverts back to idle. So if I go into the actual player, and I increase the jump multiplier, let's just change to 100 for now. And if I jump into the game, I jump, and the rising animation, where it's just holding that rise, lasts the entire time that it's going up, and then it transitions. And that's the practical application of splitting up this full animation into 5 smaller ones. So it will always have that normal jump start animation, but that rising animation will hold for much longer when you're being launched up. And that's useful for, say, if you want to add like some kind of super jump in your game, or you can bounce off of something, or you're going up some kind of, I don't know, off the top of my head, for like Halo gravity lift, or in Spyro something like the sparkling lifts that lift you up. You want that rising animation to consistently play as you are lifting up. So if I jump, it's going up, and as I'm going down, it plays the down animation. And anytime I'm grounded, it plays the landing animation. I'm not actually using the logic of the character being grounded. I'm using kind of the reverse logic of that, where for these other actions, I am measuring the, not the velocity, but the change in Y position. And if there is no change in Y position from the last frame, then I just put both rising and falling as false. So you can see over here in the parameters, there's a rising and falling boolean, and both of those are set to false. And if I jump, rising is set to true. If I'm falling, falling is set to true. And inversely, if I'm rising, falling is set to false, and if I'm falling, rising is set to false. And this is very useful for that. Right now, if I were to walk off of the cliff, having a separate falling animation is also useful for this, because instead of just it being the kind of after effect of a jump, if I walk off the side of the cliff, you'd expect a falling animation to still play, even though a jump was never executed. So if I walk off of here, we're transitioning from the run to the idle to the falling animation, the hold down animation, and then this will keep playing until I land. If you want to get more fun with the animation, which I plan to do in the future, you could set some kind of float that actively measures how long the character's been falling, and if you fall for a certain amount of time, you could play a more intense falling animation, like the character starts flailing because it's going to be a fatal fall of some kind. So that's pretty much all I wanted to show today. I don't know if I'm going to jump into the code. I guess I might as well. If I go into the player controls code, and I look in here, if it loads, and right here is where we have everything. This is different, we don't need to care about that, but I have this change in Y variable. And that's just the float. So how that's being measured is if I go down to this enumerator that I have in place, this get change in Y kind of function or coroutine. It takes a variable y1, which is the first recorded elevation, and then it yields and waits for the next fix update, which just means that it waits for the next frame. And then it measures the second Y position, and it gets the difference between those. So it can determine if the character is moving up or down. And if the character is moving up, so if Y change is greater than the margin of change. And the reason the margin of change is there is because I can normally just set it to 0, which actually wouldn't work in this particular instance because the second aspect of that is checking for the negative margin of change. But what I want it to do is it won't take into effect if the character is moving up and down unless it is to a certain degree. So, and by degree I don't mean angles or anything like that. I mean how severe is the change in the Y position. So it's just checking for that. So when that's there, that just means it's pretty explicit in its title. It's the margin of change that it's measuring or comparing to. So if the change in Y is greater than the margin of change, rising is true because the character is rising, falling is false because the character is not falling. And vice versa. If the change in Y is less than the negative margin of change, then rising is false, falling is true. And the else statement is just for anything in between the negative and positive margin of change. So, yeah, that's just about it. And I thought that was kind of an interesting way to go about handling the animation. I'm sure that's how a lot of games do it. I didn't watch any tutorial on how to do this. I just figured it was a very reasonable and logical way to do this. Because you could just have one animation that is the jump, and it would just be all these smaller animations all put into one. But how would you handle jumping much higher or jumping from a cliff onto a lower platform? There have to be these kind of breaks in the animation. I guess you could play the entire animation and somehow pause it in between with animation events, but that seems even more complicated. So I think this is a really nice way of doing it. It looks like there's a lot of crisscrossing things here, but those are just extra conditions that would be going on. Like if we're running and we run off a cliff instead of jumping, it's going to go to the hold down animation there. And if we're landing, but we're not landing and want to go to the idle, it's going to the run animation. If we are in the, what is it called, hold up animation, where the character's lifting, but say they jump onto a higher platform, we might not have time to go to that 2 down animation, so here is a direct transition to the landing animation. It's just a lot of, logical conditions that you have to consider inside the game when determining how the animation will play out as the character is moving about. And I thought that might be interesting to anyone who wanted to watch this, so I recorded the video, and that's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm pretty sure I covered everything that I wanted to talk about today, but if you liked what you saw, please follow me on my Twitter at cyberbully20xxd. I don't know if that is a temporary name. It's pretty much just my main Twitter name, but with a D at the end for dev. I'll probably change that in the near future, not like immediately, but at some point. So that will be outdated in this video, but for the meantime, go there if you want to follow my development Twitter. And that's about it. Thank you for watching, and subscribe if you liked it, like the video, comment if you have any questions, or if you just wanted to talk about what's going on in the video. Do that then. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.